Today we'll be going over the Before You Bikepack the Pictish Trail, a 450 mile, 750 kilometre bikepacking route through the Pictish kingdoms of Scotland. A route traversing through the Scottish Highlands, either from the most northerly point, Dunnet Head, to Scotland's capital, Edinburgh, or all the way to the most northerly point from Edinburgh. In this video, I will try to give you some first-hand knowledge and experience of riding this route very recently, so if you are looking to take on this route, you know what to expect. From which bike is best to use, the wild camping, using public transportation, and finally giving a route difficulty rating out of 10. 10 being extremely hard. I will also give this route my overall rating that is based on how I personally enjoyed this route. Again, 1 being don't bother and 10 being the best thing since sliced bread. Let's get into it. The Pictish Trail is a route that takes you on an adventure through the ancient Pictish kingdoms of Scotland. The Picts were descendants of the native Iron Age people. They lived between 300 AD and 900 AD in what is now called Scotland, in the area north of the River Clyde and the River Forth. The name Picti means painted people and is thought to refer to the Pictish practice of tattooing their bodies, although I took this route on in a reverse direction, which we will get into later in the video. The route consists of multiple different types of terrain, from roads, paved bike paths, gravel bike paths, forest tracks, single track, and a little bit of everything really. The route does not follow one continuous trail and uses lots of different trails, so you will want a GPS unit for mapping, with the Pictish Trail following more along the lesser used east coast, unlike a lot of the Scottish route, means that you get to experience Scotland in a different way, from sea views to mountains. With over 450 miles and 750 kilometers and 30,000 feet or 9,000 meters of elevation gain, there are plenty of impressive views and plenty of history to discover along the way. It's a route that isn't overly remote, which means there is more time to enjoy some of the smaller built-up areas along this route. If you are wanting a Scottish adventure that has some aspects of the remote, rugged Scottish landscape, but is happy to come into the more built-up areas than a lot of the other Scottish routes, then this is actually a very good route for that. Being a route that goes up the east of Scotland, it does make it a little bit more built up and much easier to manage everything from supplies to accommodation. You will get to experience the remote landscape of Scotland, but in smaller doses, which can be a nice change from having to be completely self-reliant. Again, it's a nice change from a lot of bikepacking routes in the UK. But this does also mean you will be in some busy areas, as this route does take you up the A9 on a couple of occasions. One of which I think could be avoided, more on that later though. The route is on the less technical side, and the off-road sections are mostly gravel, and Scottish gravel at that, which means on the smoother side. I went in the northern direction, starting in Edinburgh, and there was minimal hiker bike and the trails rolled well. I think if you have a good level of fitness, but maybe are not overly confident of the really remote and technical bikepacking routes, then this is a good option. You do need a good level of fitness to get through the miles, but with a lot of this route following flat bike paths, it is not overly technical on the riding side. If you enjoy stopping lots, then this is also a great option, as there are plenty of little towns that you will pass through. If you want to go on a fairly long distance Scottish adventure where you could take anywhere from around a week, then I think this is a good route. It's a route that you can really pass through the miles quickly if you want, or slow and steady as you like, and enjoy all the little places you come through, with plenty of built up areas to explore and plenty of remote landscapes to surround yourself in. This route officially starts at the furthest north point in the UK, Dunnet Head, but I decided to take this route on in reverse, starting in the capital of Scotland, Edinburgh. I mainly did this because of the public transport taking over 2 days to get all the way to the top for me, and only a half a day to get to Edinburgh. But overall, I was happy I went in this direction. I think I enjoyed it more in this direction than I would have if I had gone in the official direction. I met many people along this route, all doing the Pictish Trail, and in the official direction. And they all seemed to be grinding their way through the miles. But the direction I went, I found that the climbs were nearly all rideable and with very little hiker bike. Still a little bit, but not much. And I was glad I was descending the way I was, rather than having to climb them climbs. It seemed like all the climbs were all rideable and the descent seemed to last longer, meaning any time lost going uphill didn't really matter because I would have lots of easy miles after. Going in the reverse direction made the climbing feel a lot shorter, if not sometimes a little bit steeper but still rideable, and the descending way longer. I feel if I had gone in the official direction, I would have had a lot more sluggish miles. Personally, if I was to ride this route again, I would go in the same direction, from south to north. I also feel it is more fun to end at the most northerly point. There is one section of this route that is pretty rough going though. In either direction, honestly, especially if it is wet, and I can't imagine it is ever completely dry on this section. This part of the trail is a boggy mess and no fun to ride. It is also really quite easy to avoid, and by avoiding this section, you can also avoid a section of the A9, which is quite a busy road, especially in the summer months. And if you are going in the official direction, you will have a 20% climb along the A9, which isn't particularly fun on a busy road. Also, the creaky, slippery bridge of death. If you watch the full Bikepacking the Pictish Trail video, well then you know. I have added the detour that I think would work well to avoid these sections. You can get this from the Keep Smiling Adventures website, the link is in the video description. If you follow the red line, then you can see you rejoin the route, but in reverse, which means you still get to ride through the endless gravel trails through the flow country. It also means whether you start at Dunnet Head or Edinburgh, you won't be riding from Thurso to Dunnet Head, then back again. Up to you though, but if I was to take this route on again, I would probably divert that section of mud and bog trails. Like I said, this route is actually fairly easy going and with not lots of overly technical sections. But I do think in terms of tyre size, a 45mm tyre will serve you well, just to give you a bit of confidence on the fast descents, whichever direction you go. But you will 100% want something fast rolling, as there are lots of flat, fast rolling sections, some of which along the road, but mostly is bike paths that are smooth gravel or paved. A gravel bike will be good, or an XC bike, but in all honesty, for the most part, even an XC bike might be overkill for a lot of this route. Just a bike with a good range of gearing and good brakes that you find comfortable to ride. One thing I found was there were some lock gates or kissing gates that I needed to chuck the bike over, so whichever bike you decide to take, make sure you are able to lift it. Being Scotland, the rules on wild camping mean that it is allowed and is fairly quite straightforward. However, this route coming through lots of built up areas does mean you will need to get through these sections to find a suitable place, which at times can be quite a lot of miles, so it would be best to try and plan your route beforehand so you are finishing each day in the remoter sections of this route in between the towns. The nature of this route coming through plenty of towns means it is a bit easier to plan stops and B&Bs along this route if you would prefer for a bit more comfort. Or in the summer, away from them dreadful midges that might be present along places in this route. With this route coming along more of the built-up side of Scotland, it really does make finding supplies a lot more easier and regular than other Scottish bikepacking routes. If you can manage to pack enough food and supplies for around 50 miles of cycling, I think you'll be fine. The most remote sections of this route is through either the Cairngorms or towards the end, from the east coast across to Thurso through the flow country. But the flow country is fairly fast going with nice smooth gravel. But the rest of the route, I was always able to find a little shop somewhere to stock up. I'd recommend bringing a water filter so you can filter your own water to avoid having to buy it, as there are plenty of streams to collect water from along this route. I chose to start in Edinburgh and make my way to Dunnet Head, the furthest northern point of mainland UK, because it takes more than a day for me to get there. There aren't a lot of trains all the way to Thurso, Thurso being the closest station to Dunnet Head. This is also true to get back to Inverness. There are around 3 trains most days leaving from Thurso station. So starting this route at Dunnet Head can be a bit of a chore to get to. You will need to pre-book your bike on the trains from Inverness to Thurso or vice versa, as these trains get booked up pretty fast, and ScotRail are normally pretty strict on this, and the trains only normally allow around 4 bikes per train. The train that goes up to Thurso or back to Inverness use a frame mount, I will call it, where you will need to remove your frame bag to get it on. It's a bit of a pain, and if you are on a small frame, well, all I've got to say is good luck. This route is a fairly long one at 450 miles, but feels fairly fast going in parts. There are plenty of paved sections on this route, from quiet country lanes to separated bike paths. In the direction I travelled, these seemed to come after some tougher trails, which I was always thankful for. It always felt like each day you could feel like you were making good progress, even if sometimes you had some harder, slower sections first. A lot of Scottish bikepacking trips can be incredibly remote, meaning you need to be really self-sufficient and carry a day or more worth of food and supplies. But as the Pictish Trail heads up the east coast of Scotland, it is a lot more built up with a lot more opportunities to resupply or find civilization. There are still remote sections, don't get me wrong, but they tend to be in between 2 built up towns, so it's easy enough to feel prepared for these sections. You will only need to be able to carry enough food for around 50 miles, around 80 kilometers at most, occasionally. And water is easily found from filtering along this route. The actual trails vary a lot in terrain types, but a lot of the off-road sections are wide gravel tracks, mostly pretty smooth gravel tracks at that. There are some rougher double track and some steeper single track trails, but a lot of this route just isn't that technical. If you head north instead of south, I think you'll find there's very little in the way of hiker bike. I had a few sections that were hiker bike, but that was mostly due to the extremely windy conditions I faced over the first few days of this ride. One thing that was a little annoying along this route though was that some of the gates had been padlocked shut, so I had to chuck my bike over, and you will also need to be able to lift your bike over a couple of times on this route. In terms of difficulty, it's somewhere in the middle. The distance might be hard for some, but I think the trails are on the easier side, at least for Scotland. I will give this a 6.5, maybe a 7 for difficulty, and most of that difficulty I feel will be for the distance for most people. We'll call it a 7. I really enjoyed this trip as a whole. It was a fun, experience Scotland in a less demanding way. A more relaxing ride over always grinding and battling with the Scottish landscape, but still enough of a challenge to feel rewarding each day. There is plenty of beauty along this route too, and plenty of opportunities to stop and just enjoy what Scotland has to offer. I think I will be giving this route an 8 out of 10, but with a little detour, I would probably put this up there at around a 9. Riding this route was an enjoyable experience, one that I feel is a bit more accessible to a lot of the extreme Scottish routes, and that was evident by the amount of people I met riding this route with all different level of abilities and bikes.